Afternoon, everyone, and thank you very much for this study. I have been an advisor to Voatz for just about 5 years now, and it's been an exciting opportunity for me as the former state treasurer and a former state representative and former state senator. I'm always excited for new ways to create opportunities to make government work better. And this conversation hopefully will focus on some of the people who are at the forefront of doing that. You know, the role of technology in delivering better government has never been more crucial. With the pandemic, the adoption of technology has accelerated. The silver lining has been that remotely accessible government services have improved. The dreams of truly smart cities are being realized. Blockchain holds the potential to build citizens' trust in government. The promise of blockchain applications is bringing transparency and accountability that was previously impossible. Today, we have an exciting panel of guests who are joining us. I'd like to first introduce Senator Eric Lesser from Longmeadow, Massachusetts. He is a highly regarded advocate for improved education and economic development. Also, he is the host of Lunch with Lesser. So if you want to check that out, his blog, that's a lot of fun. A Gaumond is an old friend who worked as a chief of staff to a Springfield legislator and brings 2 decades as a town manager. He serves in Weston, Massachusetts, and works closely with select board member Harvey Boshart, who chairs Weston's committee to explore how communities can expand the use of technology to manage town meeting votes. In his spare time, he is a managing director at JP Morgan. And finally, Nimit Sawhney is the co-founder and CEO at Voatz, which is a blockchain-based mobile voting platform that has already, as John Tapper mentioned, facilitated 15 public government elections on its platform. So I'm looking forward to this important conversation today, being a part of blockchain in Boston. So I'd like to sort of, start it with Senator Lesser and then go on to some of the other panelists, again, trying to make this as conversational as Zoom will allow. So Senator Lesser, what do you think the appetite is to introduce specifically technologies, blockchain technologies into voting and other forms of governance from the state level and into our town meetings?
Well, first, thanks so much to everyone for having me. And I do want to give a special thank you to Shannon, who's been a great leader on these issues for a long time, and certainly no stranger to this. And a lot of the innovation she championed in the Treasurer's office and in both the state Senate and in the state House before that, really was path-breaking for its time and laid the groundwork for a lot of what we're doing now. So I come at this as a Western Mass legislator who sees actually the way, in very structural ways, the way we govern ourselves in our state, keeps certain people out of the conversation, and actually the role that a more digital, more remote participation could open for new voices coming into government. So, just as a small example, when the state went remote, so to speak, last March, in March of 2020, the governor issued an executive order basically allowing boards and commissions and local government agencies to conduct their business remotely. Now, for a lot of people in the tech world, that would have seemed obvious to have done a long time ago, but it took a pandemic to get the state to do it. And what you actually saw is in these bodies, participation went up. Because it makes sense. It was easier for people to participate, whether they were parents with young kids, whether they were people that worked night shifts or didn't work traditional 9-to-5 schedules, or people that lived in remote or farther regions of the state or didn't have easy access to transportation. Just a small example, we would have a lot of trouble getting Western Mass residents, for example, to participate in state boards, policymaking boards, because for somebody from Springfield or Longmeadow or Pittsfield, it's really an all-day trip to get in and out of Boston. And for town meetings, you need to be able to leave your house in the evening and sit in a school gym for hours. And that's only a certain type of person, frankly, that's able to do that. Parents aren't able to do that. People who are working during those periods aren't able to do that. So I think this holds a lot of promise. And frankly, it's something that I think the public at this point is going to expect.
I can just plan on that, and it really is all of us here are sort of Massachusetts based, and I know that we have some participants who are not even, within the United States. So just to sort of give by way of background, Massachusetts has an incredibly rich history, surrounding the issue of town meeting. In smaller towns in Massachusetts, open town meeting means any registered voter in town literally serves as part of the deliberative body that approves budgets and other major changes in annual town, authorization of issues. In larger towns, it's a little bit more manageable because they have elected town meeting members. So Leon, what I wanted to ask you is, in a post-COVID world where large gatherings have been severely limited, town officials are obviously struggling to function within historic quorum rules, throwing this tradition into chaos. So can you tell us about the general challenges that you face running a town meeting, but in particular discuss the challenges you faced while managing a town meeting during COVID?
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Shannon. And thank you for the Voatz folks for pulling this seminar together. I mean, the biggest problem that we have is, and as you mentioned, this is a very historic type process. It's been, hundreds of years in Massachusetts, the way that many municipal town governments have operated. The biggest challenge we have, whether it's COVID or not, is getting people to come out, getting people interested, educated, and informed of the issues. When every registered voter in your town is quote unquote a legislator who will decide budgets or zoning issues or the like, getting them, educated, informed, and most importantly, present has always been a challenge. But dealing, with the challenges of COVID, and trying to schedule a meeting in the COVID time, our annual town meetings are typically held in May. Last year, thanks to Senator Lesser and the state legislature and the governor, we were given some flexibility to move our meetings accordingly in order to try to do so in a safe way. We know that people are really struggling to, continue to do operations as usual, but in different ways. Getting people, the general public, to come to a meeting physically was a challenge. Not just the general public, but people who serve on the boards and committees who are charged with making presentations, making, statements to support or defend their articles, their motions. Though, it's hard to get people out when they're concerned about their safety of their family or friends. One of the things that we did last year to try to even, make our, town meeting as seamless and as easy and as non-controversial as possible is, we really utilized, consolidation of like putting a group of articles together as a consent agenda to try to, make town meeting move a little bit faster. I'm sure that some people are happy that, we take those actions. I think other people are concerned that, are we taking too many liberties in trying to make our town meetings go so smoothly and so quickly that for some reason people might feel that they're not being heard, or more importantly, they don't have a chance to be heard. Even though there are mechanisms to remove these articles from our consent agenda, it still might leave people, questioning, is this the best way to handle this? But we also, in the positive way, I suppose, we use this as an opportunity to reinvent how we look at town meeting. Last year's annual town meeting, and even this year's annual town meeting that is going to be held next Saturday, we're taking advantage of many different opportunities to educate the general public on the articles, on the issues that are being heard, the budget, for example, the zoning articles. We've established videos, on our town's website through our public access channel that are going to take the place of in-person presentations. And, we've presented information through our town's website to try to defend the articles as far as, trying to get people to be educated before they get to town meeting so that we don't have to spend an inordinate amount of time learning about the issues and debating the issues right at that moment. Thanks, Shannon.
Thanks, Leon. And so obviously, I'm a student of government, and the intricacies of this, are very, interesting, but also, I've been there before. And I will tell you that having sat through both open town meeting where anybody can come in, or even representative town meeting, sometimes after that third, fourth, or fifth hour, freedom of speech and participation is not at the top of your list as a municipal official. So I applaud you for being concerned about that. And I can see Harvey smiling. So anyway, Harvey, you've been a select board member for a number of years, and you've taken a leadership role to find new ways to facilitate how you can use technology to have remote voting. First of all, to keep people safe during COVID, but also to, I presume, just increase participation. So can you describe sort of how this committee was formed, what you're focused on, and what some of the hurdles are to you as a public official in terms of incorporating blockchain or other technologies to make town governance better, smarter, faster, easier?
Well, thank you, Shannon. So this committee was formed as a follow-on committee to a committee that was charged at looking at town meeting and ways to making it better, with the quote unquote better being very open-ended. Part of that original committee was to conduct a town-wide survey that actually had a very decent amount of responses. And it asked people about town meeting, whether they went or not, and went through specific reasons as to why they may not go to town meeting. And it became very clear when we looked at the demographics that there's an older, portion of the population were attending town meeting. And the responses from the residents wasn't that they didn't go to town meeting because they didn't care, which is a very popular opinion. It's because there are, significant obstacles to town meeting. You've got childcare issues. If you've got young children, you've got sports, you have work. Older folks may not be able to drive at night. So there's a lot of obstacles. And in Weston, the participation rate in town meeting, varies between 2% and 4%, which is, a very small number when you look at it. I think that looking at surrounding towns in Massachusetts, that is not unusual. It's usually around 2% to 4%. So as part of that committee, we looked at ways to make town meeting better and increase participation. And there were two things that we looked at. One was, remote participation. So sitting in your hotel room, if you're traveling, sitting at home on your couch, watching it on TV via live stream and being able to vote remotely, or something like that. And then also looking at what they do in New Hampshire, which is split debate and vote, which is you have a town meeting with debate, and then 30 days later, you go to the polls and you vote. This follow-on committee was charged with looking at those two options and figuring out the best way to put the town in a position to be able to decide the direction they want to go into. So when you talk about obstacles, the way that we, looked at it is, what's the right order? Because the state needs to approve any either one of those options, and then the town would obviously have to adopt it. So the committee's still meeting, but the one thing that is likely to happen is that we will educate the community on remote voting if that's the direction we want to go in. And I think that we've spoken to Voatz early on years ago when they didn't have as much success and we're just starting out, and we're fascinated by the technology and the application for the town. And we need to educate the residents and then do some sort of advisory vote at the election to then be able to go to the state and go to other communities and say, Weston voters want you to pursue this. Because right now, either one of those options aren't allowed at the state level. To some degree, the electronic voting is approved at the state level. So that is using a handheld remote while sitting at town meeting. And during COVID last year, the state allowed for limited use of remote voting or remote participation for representative town meeting, but not open town meeting. Mm-hmm. So, I like to say that, a pandemic hits the fast forward button on innovation and adaption. And I think that, the need is definitely there. Talking to other communities, it is hard to get to town meeting. And on top of that, our auditorium seats 600 or 700 people. Even if we increase participation to 15%, which would be a big number, where are we going to fit all these people? Right. Just really don't have the space. So there's a lot of issues with the current town meeting. And the thing that I like best about remote voting is that it does preserve town meeting as it is. It does allow that participation, that local representation, all the good things about town meeting that we love are still preserved, but it just opens it up to a wider audience.
Thank you, Harvey. And this is one of the things that, as someone working as an advisor to Voatz, I've had an opportunity to understand. It's sort of moving on a number of different paths. It's one, getting people to understand how traditional sort of democratic, small d democratic processes can be enhanced using, state-of-the-art technology, but it requires change in law, and then it requires change in attitude, and then it requires, getting people to adopt it. Although I will say, and I'm sure that Nimit will talk about this when we get to him in a couple of minutes, but one voter in Utah who actually they've highlighted, you can go and, I think if you, I think Nimit, how old was she? 100, 102, I forget, but that was one of the first people who, 106. So actually, they had an elderly woman who she was one of the first people to use, remote voting, use blockchain-based remote voting to cast her ballot. So in turning now, once again, to Senator Lesser, you may be the hero, at least for many municipal officials across the state who are, grappling with the sort of dilemma of one, reduced participation, potentially because of COVID or just, because of, day-to-day living, but how you can have town meeting remain that sort of vibrant New England small d democratic tradition, but doing it in a way that's safe during COVID, but also allows modern participants to be able to have their voice heard. So could you talk a little bit about the legislation that you filed and sort of what your thoughts are and any hurdles that you have towards getting that done?
Yeah. So, there is legislation on this topic. It was followed by my colleague, Jason Lewis. I'm a co-sponsor, but we should give certainly Senator Lewis some credit for working on this. But for people who are keeping track, it's S2082, again, S2082, which you can look up on the legislature's website. But the idea behind this is really pretty simple, which is codifying into state law the executive order that was issued in March of 2020 to allow for remote participation. And as Harvey pointed out, there are some details that do need to be added to that, and some more specific questions that do have to be probably added to the legislation, and that will be incorporated as the committee process moves forward. But I think the biggest threshold issue we faced, and it was sort of alluded to here, is we were just operating off of inertia in the state for a long time around how town meeting worked. And there was a little bit of a sense that, well, everybody files into a gym and they wait around for hours and they listen to everybody, do their debating. And a lot of us would say, well, wait a second, we've got kids, we've got this, we've got that, we're working. How are we supposed to make this work? And there was a little bit of a sense of, just this is how it always was. So this is how it's always going to be. And obviously the pandemic changed all that. The other thing I would say is there were and there have always been some questions, and there remain some questions about the security and the integrity of voting and remote participation. And I think increasingly those issues are being addressed, and certainly Voatz is one of the examples of that. But you now have seen major companies issue IPOs, banks do all kinds of transactions completely remotely. You saw the NFL draft happen remotely. So I think the public is now attuned and sort of socialized and comfortable.
If I can interrupt you
with the idea.
Eric, if I could interrupt you, when the NFL draft is done remotely, that also gives voice to dogs,
right?
Which could be
exactly. We all saw Coach Belichick's
in the
dog.
future, if you.
Yeah, exactly. We all saw that. So anyway, just to wrap up, what I would just say is, the biggest challenge that we had with this has already been I think overcome, which is both the public skittishness about remote work, which I do think is in the rearview mirror at this point, but also the very real inertia of town governments. No offense to our colleagues in town government that had kind of really just done things the way they were always done. You couldn't do that in 2020 and in 2021. So now I do think it's going to be on the legislature to to incorporate some of these best practices into law.
Thank you, Eric. And I think that, getting more support for this legislation, I think that it becomes easier as people have grappled with almost unanswerable questions, since the pandemic. So, applaud your work doing that. So now turning to Nimit, the co-founder and CEO of Voatz, which is a Boston-based technology company, and always proud that we have, Boston leading the way on a number of different important, innovations in technology and many other innovations that have been historic to our area. But could you just explain, how blockchain technology that is incorporated in Voatz, maybe answer some of the questions raised by Senator Lesser about, giving confidence that votes can be transferred securely and without interference, but also talk a little bit about the flexibility, that would be provided to, town meeting, or other voting opportunities on local levels. So again, it's sort of an open-ended question. I know you can handle that.
Yeah, so in our case, the blockchain provides a few very distinct benefits. One is just by the nature of the infrastructure, we've removed any single point of failure. So if you look at traditional online voting systems or online participation systems, they've always had that one kind of central point of attack. So if a remote attacker or a remote adversary wants to disrupt that process, be it any kind of electoral or participation process, it's been fairly easy for them to do that. With this new type of highly distributed infrastructure, that becomes exponentially difficult. So just as an example, our infrastructure runs on 64 different nodes spread across the country. And so they would literally have to disrupt 2/3 of the internet backbone in the US to even start to have an impact on this process. And you can imagine if that happens, so many other red lights would go off. So it's possible, but the probability of that happening is greatly reduced. The other advantage of a system like this is, for the first time, it gives end users, voters, participants, the ability to audit. And it preserves a paper trail. So for situations like, normal voting or even town meeting where, paper trail has always been desired or, cherished, you can still continue to do that. And at the same time, give digital access to people. You can mark it on your smartphone, mark it on a tablet, make that process really easier, convenient. Changes are pretty fast. So in a town meeting scenario, and we actually piloted this with the town of Hopkinton a couple of years ago, where amendments come to, a certain article from the floor, and we were able to, recycle that ballot immediately within a couple of minutes. And in that scenario, I think we had about 550 people instantly submit an updated vote. So definitely it makes that easier. People don't have to, be physically present. It can authenticate you if you're sitting at home. It gives you the ability to geofence. So you could still mandate that, let's say in the case of the town of Weston, every voter has to be at home in Weston. So if they're in Boston, they wouldn't be allowed to participate in the town meeting. You could set restrictions like that as well using, geofencing based approaches as well. And so I think the combination of all that makes this kind of take it to the next level. You can preserve the tradition of the town meeting form of government, but at the same time attract a lot of people. I think a lot of, let's say, middle-aged and younger people would love to participate and provide their feedback. And I think it'll make the process more stronger and definitely more resilient from our perspective.
Reaching out to Harvey again. So, we've actually talked about this before about the nature of town meeting, and Nimit just referenced that. But the constant changing amendment, further amendment beyond that. When you talked about the sort of two-tiered approach to voting, I would presume that that this would just make that so much less cumbersome. Were you to be able to use remote technology, that you could do this in one fell swoop.
Yeah, and it's already challenging when there are amendments, right? Because first we usually have an overhead screen that has PowerPoint on it, so that needs to get reworded, and town council needs to weigh in on it. But it's actually when you're live streaming it, all this stuff can be done, and everyone's updated at the same time. When you look at the other option of split debate and vote, ultimately, because the vote happens after town meeting, you would get access to the updated information. But what makes town meeting great is the ability to make these legislative changes, on the go, and certainly, if you're remote, it means you have to pay attention too, because if someone completely changes it, you can't just blindly vote yes if something's changed.
But I would also presume, and again, having myself participated, I came from my hometown in Western Massachusetts in East Hampton. That was always a representative town government. So I really didn't participate in town meeting until I became married and became a resident of Whitman. And I've attended some of the open town meetings and keeping track of some of the amendments. I mean, the way we do it now is, we vote with pieces of paper and, figuring out whose amendment is it, whose further amendment is it, that is something that is difficult to track. And I've actually talked to some other community members, actually sort of one interesting opportunity for, new technologies, blockchain-based technologies, is in one particular community outside of Boston. There is, a person who has a physical disability, which makes it difficult for them to enunciate when they're actually participating in a city council meeting. And so they've actually looked at remote voting, not just, for maybe a big meeting with 200, 300, 400, maybe 1,000 people, but even just with a small city council, so that this person, with some disabilities is able to register his or her vote and make sure that there is a track record of it during the process of, a city council meeting. So, while technology, obviously, I think it's clear what town meeting needs and the challenges there, even in smaller, currently remote functioning bodies, being able to do this in a way where you can track the votes and keep that in front of you at all times is important. So quickly, Leon, one of the, we're just about at the 4:30 hour, so I want to just make sure that we can, get to a couple more points. But are there other communities? Is there any coalition either between you and Harvey, other communities that are pushing for this across the state? Is that happening right now?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, there are communities who have expressed a sincere interest in doing this. up to this point, when I say up to this point, up to the advent of COVID, I think that there was an easy way for communities like Weston with open town meetings to be told no, because, that was the way it had always been done. The answer was always no. So we were kind of climbing an uphill battle. But I do think that the, post-COVID and the experiments that have been tried and been reasonably successful in those communities where we have representative town meeting, where they've been successful, I think it's really opened up the dialogue with a lot of other communities to say, hey, listen, we think we can pull this off. And in an era of trying to increase government transparency and participation, we should be trying to open things up and get more participants and more opinions to the table. So yeah, I think there is a groundswell of communities across the state who are ready, willing, and able, and are actively working towards the same goals that we are in Weston.
So Senator Lusha, you've been active politically on both the national, and the local and state level. So you bring a pretty broad set of experiences here. One of the issues, and we saw this on the ballot, a referendum question here in Massachusetts last year on ranked choice voting. New York is looking at this. Maine has already adopted this. Just wondering what your thoughts are about how remote voting, secure blockchain-based or other remote voting that would allow for automatic tabulation or recalculation. How you think that might play into our opportunity to create new voting paradigms here in Massachusetts and across the country.
I think it's important that we don't overlearn the lessons of the pandemic. So I think in the sense that the sort of model of remote work, remote participation at this point has had wide adoption in a way that you did not have in 2019 or 2018, let alone earlier than that. I do think that the 2020 election, just as an example, did give the public some pause about overly relying on electronic voting and overly relying on, electronic participation, which is why I think the points that, Nimit made about the blockchain in particular are really transformative here, because there is a paper trail. There is a level of transparency. There is a level of security to it that you didn't have with other technologies. And that really, I do think, combined with the lessons of the pandemic is a breakthrough. The other thing I would just add, Shannon, to all of this is, there's a lot of nostalgia about town meetings, especially here in New England and in Massachusetts. And I do think that the town meeting form of government is a form that should be celebrated. I mean, it goes back to Alexis de Tocqueville. We all see the Norman Rockwell paintings. It's a cornerstone of the sort of civic infrastructure of our state. And so I think it's also important to sort of present this as this is not about ending town meeting. It's not about canceling it. It's actually about reinvigorating it. And it's about Harvey's point about broader participation, more energetic participation, more diverse participation, because there really is only a small segment of people. When you hear that in Weston is one of the most active towns, and the fact that in Weston you're only having 2% of people, participate in town meetings, I think people should hear numbers like that and should be very concerned, about, and it's not Weston's fault. That's one of the best statistics in the whole state. And the idea that you could now reinvigorate this really ancient institution in a way that brings it new energy and brings new people and new voices in, I think is very exciting. And I think the public will be excited to embrace it.
The issues of access, and this is one of the things that I've been particularly focused on, not necessarily, strictly focused on town meeting, which is sort of the basic framework of what we're talking about here today in your legislation. But the issue of accessibility, not only to people, who have busy lives and children, but in particular, those people who have special hurdles to being able to just vote in general, in particular, persons, with disabilities. And just this past year, with some of the attempts to deal with COVID, as it pertains to voting or participation in some of, in some other, public voting options, we've put together these stopgap measures that attempted to deal with COVID, but ultimately they weren't ADA accessible, Americans with Disabilities Act. So that is also, another constituency that it's very important for people to remember, who already have assistive technologies within their smartphones, with biometrics and, all sorts of, ability to either translate a different language. And so that's, I think, what's also very, very exciting about new technology and in particular, Voatz, is that there are ways that we can have marginalized, and that's not really a great word, but disadvantaged people or persons overseas, military who, we've seen how slow the mail is right now. And so people being able to vote overseas is an incredibly cumbersome and frankly insecure process. And so, I do believe that we're at a threshold, looking at your bill, Senator Lesser, looking at the work that Harvey and Leon are doing in Weston to, gain public support. I think it's an exciting time because we can rethink important institutions and how they work better for a lot of people who've been, disadvantaged. So, I just want to make, allow Nimit to make, maybe one, last point, to maybe tell us about what you think, your greatest success, Nimit, has been in terms of sort of promoting that small D democracy. Do you have any, one story, that you think? I've already stolen your thunder on the 106-year-old elderly woman in Utah, but I don't know if you have, any other thoughts about how you've seen, a blockchain-based technology, really change the process or change people's lives in your experience.
Sure. Yeah, we were very sort of privileged and honored to be the first app blockchain-based system to be used in the presidential elections last year. We were in 2 states, in Utah and in Oregon, and a few thousand people used the system. But I would say the most fascinating experience we had in terms of supporting a voting or electoral process was last year after the presidential elections here in December. We were fortunate to be selected to do a national referendum in Venezuela for the Guido government. As you might know, Venezuela has two governments. So the Guido government, which is largely recognized now by the US, the EU, most of the world. So they organized a national referendum, and it went over a week. We had about 6 million people who participated. Almost 2 million voted digitally. And that was a very interesting test for our platform, because for the first time we had nearly 2 million people vote, in kind of a simultaneous process. And at the same time, we had a nation state actor trying to disrupt the process, namely the incumbent government over there. And they tried every manner of attack possible to disrupt the process, disrupt the voting. And the system stood its ground. And I think that was a very kind of strong moment for us, in the sense that it gives us confidence that such systems can operate in the real world. We all know that, the threats are always going to be there. They're perhaps going to get worse as time goes by. And so we basically have 2 choices. Either we, not do anything, or we try to build systems who are resilient and those that can function in the presence of these threats. And I think that's the choice we as a collective, as a society, and for us as a, technology company, we've made. And I think it's really important to remember that things can never be 100% safe in any form of, process, whether you vote in person or you vote by mail or you vote with any technology. There's always some kind of loophole somebody will figure out. But what's important is in all of the other approaches, we found ways to make things safe enough, which gives us the trust and the confidence to use them. And similarly, in this electronic voting, electronic participation space, there is a way to make things safe enough. And I think that's what we and some of the other players are focused on. So it's important to keep that in mind. And lastly, I would say we just landed a helicopter on Moon a few days ago, and on Mars, right?
Mars.
Yeah, on Mars. So I mean, clearly technology has moved leaps and bounds, and so if we can do that, surely we can build a voting system that's safe enough for our citizens to vote, especially those who can't vote with the traditional methods. So that's all I'd like to share. Yeah, thank you.
That's great. So I think that we're kind of, coming to the end here. I think that this is really exciting, and I thank the people who've participated here. We have some municipal officials who are on the front line creatively thinking about how they can do a better job on behalf of their constituents to make their town more responsive and more resilient to allow for, again, small d democracy to thrive. I want to thank Senator Lesser for all he's done to co-file some of this legislation. And there are a couple of pieces of legislation that will be looking at different ways to implement new technologies to support options to either vote for persons with disabilities, UOCAVA voters, pilot projects to do exactly the study that Nimit is talking about. So anyway, I just want to thank the team, and I want to thank everyone for joining in this afternoon.